Me in church history. I can't get enough. Okay. I'm going to have to slip out a few minutes early because for my many sins, I'm being sent to a clergy meeting. What can I say? So please welcome Dr. Gordon.
It's great to be back here at Sacred Heart, where it's not 20 below zero, like it is in Chicago. You know, Americans have taken their religious freedom for granted, and we really shouldn't, because there have been many instances of persecution of religion, the Catholic Church and other religions. And there's a delicate balance in the United States between the church and the state. This is a very compelling story, and we're now going to highlight, and I emphasize this to you because there's a lot to it, from the past to the present. Well, here's the headquarters, Rome. What did Christ say? Go forth and make disciples of all nations. And that's exactly what happened. Now here, of course, in the north and southern hemisphere, it happened later, after 1492. And it was the Spanish who really first brought Catholicism to the New World. And they came here initially, of course. They wanted to find a trade route to India, and they found that there was just two continents blocking the way to Asia, didn't it? But they came here for glory, God, and gold. At the same time, though, they had to hold on to these colonies that they had built. Unlike the English, who sent their dissenters, convicts, indentured servants to New England, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, the Spanish did not want to send anyone except good Catholics. And most Spanish farmers and merchants, they didn't want to relocate to the New World. So instead, the Spanish established a system to convert the Native Americans. Their idea was to build missions throughout South and North America, and over a 100-year time period, to turn the Indians, the Native Americans, into farmers, wheelwrights, blacksmiths, etc. So they would be the new peasants, and that the land of the missions, including the ones here in California, which we'll talk about briefly, would be turned over to the Native Americans because they irrigated it, they built it, the missions, the 21 missions, if you've seen. So the first one was here in St. Augustine, Florida, established in 1565. Over 450 years. The first Mass, actually, in St. Augustine was in 1526. But here in the Southwest, there were a whole series of missions built throughout Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and very late in the game, California. And again, the issue here was dual, both the conversion of Native Americans to Catholicism, but also to acculturate them to becoming actual peasants that would help Spain to hold on to this territory. Because again, the Spanish had a very hard time bringing people here. Well, let's look at Texas. Look at all the missions that were built by different orders. The Franciscans, the Jesuits, and others built these missions. In San Antonio, there's Mission San Jose in San Antonio, Texas, established in 1720. And there's another mission. How many have you been to the Alamo? Raise your hands. All right. Well, that was Mission San Antonio. Actually, it was built in 1718 and closed in 1793. The Spanish then also came to New Mexico in the late 1500s and early 1600s. And in Santa Fe is Mission San Miguel. Have any of you visited Santa Fe and seen San Miguel? Right, and there are others. And of course in Santa Fe is a beautiful cathedral they didn't finish one of the bell towers was never completed. There's a wonderful book called Death Comes to the Archbishop. It's a novel, but I highly recommend it to you. I think you would find it very interesting. There was, the mission in Santa Fe is the second oldest church in the United States. It was built, San Miguel, in 1610. Then the Indians rose in 1680 and killed hundreds, 700-800 Spanish settlers and priests. The Spanish reestablished their rule in 1691. And here are the trails coming from New Mexico into California later. You're going to notice something if you look at that map very carefully, and maybe some of you sitting over there would like to move over here because you'll see the slides a lot better today if you and feel free to do so. You're not going to distract me. You'll notice there was no trail that came through here. That's because it was so dry. There were no water holes. They didn't know about the Palm Springs until much later, that there was water at the base of those mountains. But you'll see how it came through San Bernardino and elsewhere to the coast. Now, the first California missions were not established until 1769. San Diego was the first mission. Of course, Father Junipero Serra was the priest who established them. He had established missions in Baja California and then moved up here. Ultimately, 21 missions were established between 1769 and 1828. How many of you have visited the missions? How many of you have visited all 21 missions? Very few. It took us a long time to do it because they're scattered over a great distance. Now, unfortunately, what happened in 1821 was the Mexican Revolution. And between 1821 and 1834, all of the missions were secularized, meaning the rancheros, the Spanish and Mexican ranchers, seized all of the church land, except the churches, though the churches fell into ruin, and basically they paid off the Native Americans who supposedly had title to any of that land and put them into servitude. By 1846, 800 landowners had seized 8 million acres from these missions. Now, it's interesting, when you go to the missions, you see the cemeteries, and you see all of the Native Americans who died at those missions. Being a historian, I have spent a great deal of time studying the history of the California missions. There are two extreme tales. It was heaven on earth. The Indians flocked there. They were happy. It was nirvana. The Indians, the other side, it was slavery and death, and it destroyed Native American life, and the missionaries were murderers. Let's now go to the middle. Many of the Native Americans came to the missions because they could get food. Also, some of them wanted to be converted, but they couldn't leave. Though some of the missions would allow the Native Americans to go back to their native villages. And around all the missions were the regular Native American tribes who were constantly attacking the missions. Most of those graves you see were natives who died at the mission. What did they die of? They were killed by those cruel priests. No, they died of disease. Between 1492 and 1890, when the U.S. frontier was closed, 80% of Native Americans who died from disease. And you're going to say, well, that's outrageous. Well, let's see. I see all of you have masks on. Why do you have this mask on? For the same reason they needed to have a mask, but they had no vaccine because chicken pox, smallpox, all of these illnesses killed these Native Americans. The first California mission, here's San Diego. Oops, I go back. All right. Well, now let's turn to the eastern coast. The East Coast, there were two great colonial rivals in eastern. How many are you from the eastern United States? Raise your hands. Okay, there were two, the French and the British. By the time of 1756, there were 3 million English settlers along the coast. There were only 78,000 French settled mainly along the St. Lawrence River Valley. Have any of you been to Quebec or Montreal? Okay, great cities. Well, the French missionaries, the Jesuits, attempted there too to convert the Native Americans. Here is a typical mission, an Indian village mission. And here are St. Isaac Jogues. Elaine and I were upstate New York. We came upon this big Jesuit retreat house, and in the middle of this was this huge wooden stockade, like a roundel of church. And supposedly that was the spot where the Iroquois burned Isaac Jogues to death. These are all of the other Jesuit missionaries that were martyred by the various Indian tribes, Native Americans. Now in New Orleans, also a French settlement, there is the Cathedral of St. Louis, and built in 1794. Have any of you seen that cathedral? Okay, it's beautiful. And right nearby, I don't know if you've seen the Ursuline Convent. It was the first and oldest girls' school in the United States, built in 1727. Have any of you seen that? Okay, well, it's not hard to find. It's still there. Now, the English were settled by religious dissenters. The dissenters were those who were not Anglicans. And they, of course, were, there are, the Puritans. 1620, Plymouth Rock, etc. No Christmas for the Puritans. They outlawed Christmas as a papist holiday. Here are some of the punishments that were weeded out by the dissenters to those that did not strictly follow their law. And here is a notice that isn't too, we're the bloody papists. You know, the Puritans came to America to worship as they pleased and to see that others did the same. Now in 1730, Lord Baltimore came to Maryland, and he was the first to establish a Catholic church, 1730, staffed by Jesuit priests. And prominent Catholic leaders from Maryland, like Charles Carroll, who's pictured here, was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. In 1785, there were only 35,000 Catholics in the new United States of America. So we were definitely a minority. Now here is America in 1840. You see that most of it is settled to the east of the Mississippi, though the Louisiana Purchase had spread across the west. Bishop John Carroll was the first bishop, Catholic bishop in the United States. 1789, he became the Bishop of Baltimore, and he built the Cathedral of the Assumption in Baltimore, which last year had its 200th anniversary, 1821. But now take a look at how many, all those denominations in America, and you can see that even at that time, when that cathedral was built, Catholicism was still a very small number of people in this country. Now came, of course, the great Irish potato famine, the blight that wiped out the crops of Ireland. And as a result, there was massive immigration to the United States by Ireland. Now, this is a picture later at Ellis Island. How many of you have had any relatives come through Ellis Island? Raise your hands. Okay, we were visiting there. My wife's father came through Ellis Island as a little boy right before World War I from Italy. A tidal wave of immigrants came between 1841 and 1920, over 34 million immigrants. And unlike the 1619 propaganda that has been published that says America was the land of death, destruction, and slavery, most of those immigrants came here for the same reason that your ancestors came here: freedom, opportunity, land. Maybe their children could be educated and get ahead. However, in the 1850s, the Know Nothing Party arose, and it arose as an anti-Catholic party because they were against rum, Romanism, and rebellion. Ah, those evil Irishmen, you know they're all drunkards. And here they are carving up the country with the Catholic priest watching them do it. Well, it was during the last quarter of the 19th century that immigrants from all over the world helped to build some of the great cathedrals of the United States. In Chicago, Holy Name Cathedral, which originally burned down in the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, was rebuilt in 1874. That's where I was married, and I am a Eucharistic minister and lector at Holy Name in downtown Chicago. St. Patrick's Cathedral, 1879. But we all know that the Pope was invading America and subverting American to our institutions, to the will of the church. Well, as a result of this, before the Civil War and afterwards, here is St. Michael's Church, burned to the ground in the 1850s. Make sure I have the right, yes. Here is the burning of St. Augustine Church in Philadelphia in 1844. And Catholic convent schools were attacked because they were luring good American girls into these institutions to become nuns and not produce Americans. And this was another effort to destroy the United States. 1876, the Catholic bishops are portrayed as crocodiles, attacking the public schools. Well, Catholic children attended public schools, and what did they teach in the public schools? They taught the King James Bible, and they attacked the Catholic Church in the public schools. So, in response to this, there was, in 1884, the Third Council at Baltimore, and it was in response to these attacks and the needs of Catholic children to be guaranteed their faith. These are the things that were passed. First, parochial schools are an absolute necessity, and every parish is obliged to have a Catholic school. Now remember, we had more nuns and brothers and priests, and there weren't that many Catholics. It gradually rose, but the number of clergy rose with it. Pastors were obligated to establish a Catholic school in every parish. Parents are required to send their children to Catholic schools unless they get permission from the bishop not to do so. And the schools should be free if possible. Well, as a result of this, you have the rise of parochial schools. In Chicago, by 1920, 35,000 children attended Polish parochial schools. Now that's a Felician nun, a Franciscan Polish order. They taught me. I grew up in Oak Lawn, which is a southwest suburb of Chicago. And I went to St. Linus Grammar School parish. The only St. Linus, this has nothing to do with peanuts now, remember. St. Linus was the second pope. But they taught me, and you would think that this was a good thing. Well, I have news for you. In Oregon, in 1922, the state of Oregon passed laws that outlawed Catholic schools. It was a Supreme Court decision in 1925 that ruled parochial schools were free to operate. In 1928, a presidential election, there it is, Al Smith, the first Catholic ever to run. And he was, of course, attacked by the KKK. And here's a nice poster showing the result. And from the dome of St. Peter's, the Pope was plotting their moves to take over the United States. That was a very powerful telescope. Work and vote against Al Smith, the wet Roman Tammany Hall candidate. There's Abraham Lincoln telling you how to vote. Across the U.S., the KKK held meetings against Al Smith, but he also against Catholic, Jews, and African Americans. And Al Smith lost to Hoover. 1882, as a result of these attacks, was organized the Knights of Columbus. Are any of you a Knight of Columbus by any chance? All right. Well, I'm a Knight of Malta, another variation on the same thing of defending the church. By 2014, there were 1.85 million Catholics, knights, in 15,000 local councils across the United States. Now, in Chicago, the first cardinal was a Cardinal Mundelein from 1916 to 1939. And he began a huge building campaign of many structures, seminaries, churches, and also the International Eucharistic Conference was held in Soldier Field and at St. Mary of the Lake Seminary in the 1920s with people from all over the world. My wife and I were in southern France a few years ago going to Mass, and we told this French priest about we were from Chicago. And he said, oh, I was there at the Eucharistic Congress, and there were hundreds of thousands of people folding. So, have any of you seen or been inside the Soldier Field? All right, they modernized it and put this ugly flying saucer on top of it to make it bigger. It's a monstrosity now. But here is the seminary he built, St. Mary of the Lake, opened in 1921. 200 men from all over the United States are there now studying for the priesthood from many dioceses. The campus, though, was built on U.S. colonial architecture. The chapel looks like an evangelical church, and the cardinal's residence is a minor version of Mount Vernon. It looks just like Mount Vernon. And why was that done? Because they wanted to show that Catholics were Americans. They were not some foreign group. Now you're going to say, well, that pretty well solves that problem. Not really. Here's a church, Faith, Hope, and Charity. Now this was in a very affluent northern suburbs of Chicago. They wanted to build a bigger church and a school, and the local people in the area who were WASPs stopped it. They passed laws saying it would lower property taxes, and the architecture was wrong. It was not until 1939 that the Illinois Supreme Court ruled that they had the right to build that church and school. Now, the Catholic population by then was growing. Between 1940 and 1960, the rise in Catholic parochial education was tremendous. And how many of you remember watching Bishop Sheen in black and white on television? Yes. Now, I was a little kid then, and I didn't, the chalkboard, J&J and all, remember all that? I didn't get a whole lot out of it, though I've read many of his books since then, and they were very good. Life is Worth Living, live television, the 50s and 60s. By 1965, there were 2.3 million Catholic school children, and religious education for learning was very important. That's why that school is so important here. And we need to support that school, since so many of those children are on scholarships, otherwise they could not attend. 1960, Kennedy ran for president, another Catholic. And once again, the whole issue of Catholicism was raised. Can actually Kennedy, here is an analysis. You can't read all that, but it was analyzing. Can he actually do it? Is the White House going to be American or Roman? Here's Kennedy with the Pope blessing him. Be sure to do what your papa tells you, it says. More anti-Catholic themes. Loyalty to the Pope or to the United States. Finally, Kennedy issued these words, that I am not a Catholic candidate for president. I am a Democrat Party's candidate for president who happens to be Catholic. Now, I had relatives in rural Pennsylvania who were Catholic, surrounded by many of other people who weren't. They organized gun clubs. And you see, when Kennedy was elected, they believed, due to propaganda, that the Pope was in a submarine in Chesapeake Bay and that he would leave and move into the White House and run the United States. They believed it. They really did. Well, times have changed, haven't they? 2015, Pope Francis addresses the U.S. Congress and visits the White House. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So, over the past 55 years, a great deal has changed. Now, the Catholics are the dominant religion. A third of all the members of Congresses are dominant. And at the same time, you now have 72 million Catholics, 17,000 parishes, 145 dioceses, 33 archdioceses, 35,000 priests in 2020, 19 U.S. cardinals. 5 cardinals are leading large dioceses, 270 bishops, 184 retired bishops, approximately 40,000 sisters and 4,000 brothers, and 2.7 million students and 19,000 deacons in parishes around the United States. Now, the Second Vatican Council, you all remember that very well, introduced lectors, commentators, Eucharistic ministers, the Mass in English, though Latin Mass is still available. Pope Paul continued that, and he was the first pope to come to the United States, and he was the first pope to address the UN, later followed by Pope John Paul II and Benedict XVI. And here he is with President Johnson. In 1959, the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, the Basilica, was built in Washington. 3 architectural styles combined, Byzantine, Gothic, and modern. How many of you have been there? Yes. The acoustics are terrible inside that church, though. In 1979, the first stop of this Polish Pope, the first non-Italian to be elected, was in Chicago. He visited Chicago. I went to the Mass in Grant Park. 1 million people attended that Mass. But then he went on to New York City, and you also see here's a ticket for that Mass for New York. Benedict the 16th, 2005 to 2013, a German pope, wrote many, many books on theology, retired in 2013 on February 28th, which happens to be my birthday, followed by Pope Francis, the first pope from the New World, in Argentine. So we've now had 3 Argentine popes. And he is faced with the continued struggle between church and state. So the great question now that we're going to deal with in the second half of this program, will the church and state remain in balance in the United States? Well, that depends. Look at this very carefully, because this is now the issue of truth. Today, more than ever, when I first started educating audiences on this a number of years ago, most people didn't even think about truth. Today is the number one issue in this country. What defines truth? Well, there have been three eras. The first era of truth was the era of pre-modern. Now remember, when we talk about truth, we also are talking about culture. What is culture? Culture is the sum total of our customs and institutions that help define truth at any time, in any country, throughout the 7,000 years of recorded history. Culture helps provide a criteria for truth to help people to know something. So Western civilization, in the pre-modern era, truth was based on authority, to past traditions for answers. Classical, Plato, Aristotle. The Christian, Christ, the Bible, Revelation, the Pope. The handing down of authority and truth through the councils. And that era lasted from the time of Christ, even before, to around 1500. The second era was modern culture. This was the time of the Reformation, 1500. It was based on scientific reasoning, experimentation, theory, hypothesis, and revisable truths. Only scientific method could define truth. Religion became something like, well, a sideline, a literary art form. It was irrelevant because only science could really reveal proven truths. That was the scientific era. And then we come now to the post-modern era, which started after the Second World War in France. Postmodernism was a rejection of Europe, of history. 2 world wars had destroyed Europe. These French philosophers came up with a postmodernist interpretation. Everything could be, in their mind, deconstructed. Even science is not an absolute truth. Each individual can construct truth only from their own personal experience. So your truths and my truths aren't necessarily the same. There are now multiple truths. In fact, there is no truth. There is no moral compass. There is no absolute right or wrong. That's what postmodernism preaches. Everything becomes relative. If you practice a religion and have faith, it is only a private matter. It shouldn't go outside this building. You can worship in here all you want, but out there in the world, it shouldn't have any relevance. So, the modernist debate makes it irrational to believe. So I am a Catholic intellectual. That's an oxymoron. I can't be both. I can't be an intellectual and be Catholic. This is the basis of atheism, nihilism, Marxism, from the writings of Nietzsche, Marx, and Engels. I believe what I can deduce. Rational behavior is reduced to a mathematical equation. Oh, well, you use the internet all the time. You know, they have those logarithms, and they're going to decide what you like or don't like, right? So when you go on, it shows you all the things that are your prejudices, all the things you like or want, all the news that you think is right to your bias. That's what you'll see, because now everything is reduced. We have you pegged on a formula. Isn't that wonderful? History, philosophy, theology, irrelevant. The past is useless. The future, don't worry about it. Live the maxim now, right now. Grab all you can. Another alternative is to cut religion down to modernity. I am spiritual, but I don't believe in any religion. Locke, Kant, Einstein were all part of this. The one that claims an experience of transcendent experience and knowledge that is bound by no one else's rules. I am transcendent. So, here's the church. Authority from Christ and revelation. The church is not voting and a personal experience. The 8 dogmas of the Catholic Church that we all believe in, that every Sunday you recite in the Creed, are the basis of our beliefs. There are others, there are doctrines, and those doctrines have changed over 2,000 years, but those 8 dogmas haven't. I'll do a series of 3 programs in March here called Saints and Sinners, a history of the papacy and the church, that I've developed for Catholics, and I have another program for RCIA. And it helps you, educate you, about how these things came about. But the postmodernists, anti-tradition, anti-authority, individual truth. So where does that leave us right now? Well, there's only your truth and my truth, and there's nothing that we understand as the quote-unquote truth. Then the West, its great accomplishments: equality before the law, tolerance, civility, religious freedom, rights of conscience, democratic self-government. The only measure of us is us. Isn't the horizon of our aspirations greatly reduced by this? Only political correct behavior, only certain words can be used. We rejects blind reference to authority. Many young people have gone off the other extreme. I do what makes me feel happy, the use of drugs. I just saw the other day that marijuana sales illegally are certainly outpacing the legal sale of drugs that the state pushed because they want more tax money. Well, now the illegal drugs are selling better. A shared religion defines rules and practices. Cultures structure people's imaginations and impose moral disciplines. But now more people are led to assume that these free-floating concepts is an essential moral unit to themselves. Morality that was once revealed, inherited, and shared, but now it's thought as something that emerges in the privacy of your own heart and nowhere else. So, a Catholic's claim to be religious is different. It is a claim that God himself has taken the initiative to reveal himself to us and to tell us who he is and who we are. Religion binds us to God according to his will, not our will. In a community of faith that he has brought into existence, being religious can therefore be threatening. We are countercultural, in case you didn't know it. We're very countercultural. So being religious as a Christian starts with the belief that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. Faith in Christ's resurrection is central to the Christian message. Jesus is not someone's personal idea. He really existed in a real body, now transformed by conquering death itself. Those who are spiritual often deny Christ's resurrection as a physical event, something that makes its own demands when you bump into it, and they don't want to bump into it. They prefer a Christ who is safely an idea in their minds, made in their image and likeness. That's why when we consecrate the host, the bread and wine, that is, through transubstantiation, the real body and blood of Christ. It does not, the bread and wine does not change physically, but spiritually, it is the body and blood of Christ. That's what helps separates our Roman Catholicism from other Christian beliefs, among other things. That's not the only thing. By contrast, the risen Christ, the real Christ, breaks into our experience and personally seeks those he calls to be religious, to believe that God has done for us much to our surprise It defines what truth is. So, what about religious freedom in America? Religious freedom is under attack. Ceding public life entirely to the government reduces religious freedom from religion, not freedom of religion. And how many people have said that to me, that great crisis is freedom from religion? There can be consequences. In the early 20th century, 30 states passed laws based on the false science of biological eugenics. 7,600 people from 7,600 people from 29 to 74 were deemed socially and mentally unfit and were sterilized. And these laws were upheld by the United States Supreme Court until the 70s. In fact, Nazi Germany based its initial laws of eugenics upon those of the United States of America. And then they went much further, obviously, and murdered 11 million people. The U.S. Supreme Court upheld eugenics, as I said, until much later. The practice of euthanasia is now legal in many parts of Europe and is being debated here. The right to life, whether it be abortion, eugenics, euthanasia, is central to our belief. We, you and me, have a responsibility to those around us to protect and preserve their lives. The old, the young, everyone. That's one reason why the debate, that's why Pope Francis says we need this so that we don't purposefully or unpurposefully infect other people. This is the plague. 800,000 people have died. I do a monthly radio show in Chicago for Catholic Chicago on COVID-19. Over 1 million Americans have died now from this, greater than all our world wars. It is sad, and it has caught us awares of the limitations of life and the limitations of science. Today, the claim that one is not equal under the law is powerful in our society, and it makes us victims. And the claim that one is being demeaned and personally wounded is even more powerful evidence of victimization. And there are all kinds of new victims. The church preaches that contemporary culture change can be redirected so that the long road to obtain respect that has been traveled by many homosexual-oriented can be maintained without destroying the institution of natural marriage. The church believes that since the difference between men and women is different from racial differences, same-sex marriage is not a civil right. It is a newly invented civil right that cannot be used to destroy a moral good, lest society itself go into decline. You know, in Europe, first, in most countries, you have to be married civilly, and then you go to a church, and you can be married in a church. Will the day come when that bride walks down that aisle and a priest marries her, that marriage will no longer be recognized by the state of California, that you have to go and have a civil ceremony instead? Could happen. We should be concerned as well about the state overreaching its proper authority, which is limited to the civil order. Pope Francis has said that we would not be opposed to civil unions between homosexually oriented persons. However, he remains opposed, as does the church, to performing marriage ceremonies. Civil law cannot be allowed to force the Catholic Church to violate our moral beliefs. We have already pointed out several instances in the past and present when civil law upheld morally objectionable practices and also persecuted Catholics. Neither the church nor the state owns the institution of marriage. The state has a right to supervise, but not to redefine an institution that it did not create. This tendency for the government to claim for itself authority over all areas of human experience flows from the secularization of our culture. If God cannot be part of public life, then the state itself plays God. There are many paths to this: fascism, communism, totalitarianism. In the United States, the path is labeled protection of individual rights, which is now being distorted. We should be concerned about the role of Catholics in public life. Historic change in economics and culture of the last 100 years has come the moral dissolution of our time. The new freedom spread and released sexual behaviors from old restraints. Psychology has seemed to condemn every inhibition and to justify every desire. Until recently, religion was relied upon by the state to give morals to youth, order to society, and hope to the oppressed. This was called, quote unquote, public morality. This has now been attacked by postmodernism, deconstructionism. Until now, the church was a moral backstop for the nation. And I'm saying now the church meaning all churches, not just the Catholic Church. Where now is the church? What will once again inspire us and give a social backstop to the nation? Pope Francis ushered in a new era that is not a matter of economic or political prescriptions, but one of renewing our faith. He works for a better understanding of the Catholic Church and its dogmas, a re-emergence of the evangelization spirit from which the church was born over 2,000 years ago. Pope Francis is trying to offer new language, better explaining church doctrines and dogmas to the entire world, on marriage and annulments, the role of women in the church, the right to life, abortion, birth control, protecting people from COVID-19. This is not an issue of the extreme left or the extreme right. This is a matter of faith in our beliefs. The increased role of the laity in the work of the church. Pope Francis will not change church dogmas. The revealed truth and revelations made through the scriptures and church councils over the past 2,000 years remain intact. In conclusion, here is what the Pope thinks the church needs to do now. Quote, I think the church must give examples of refusing every worldliness. To us consecrated persons, clergy, laity, who truly believe the greatest sin and the greatest threat is worldliness, or what I call postmodernism. The church affirms the right to serve all people throughout society and to speak and to teach of what God has revealed about human beings and their fulfillment. The church wants to make present that spiritual parsimony without which society falls apart. The church has the right and duty to keep alive the flame of human freedom and unity through our faith. Thank you. Now, I think, are going to have questions, and who will help with the microphone? Here we are. All right. If you have a question or comment, please raise your hand, and she'll come, and we can hear what you'd like to comment on or ask a question about. Right here.
Do you believe in any way that Pope Francis has been influenced by the Peronistas of Argentina?
I don't know. I can't answer that question. I know that he is not a Marxist theologian, okay? Though he was raised in a Peronist culture of extreme state control and socialism. Evita, Juan Perón, a very fascist country, all right? But I do not think the Pope is a Marxist.
I think the big problem right now is getting people to come back to church. I think that I think there's a threat against organized religion, but I also think that COVID has really, I think we've lost a lot of Catholics, and I think it's concerning. And I wonder if it'd be interesting to know if more Catholics than other religions are not coming back to church or not.
Okay. I think that's a very, very important issue. COVID has been the greatest social, economic, disruptive force since the Second World War all over the world. Those that deny its existence are lying to themselves. The propaganda against COVID is wrong. There are over 500 sites on the web preaching lies. On Saturday, I do a program at the Air Museum, The Hitler Myth and the Birth of Modern Propaganda, where I will go through exactly what propaganda is and how it's used, how the Nazis created it more effectively, and I will show how it's used today and how you can protect yourself to try to come up with the truth, not just moral truths, but what's going on in the world. But COVID, certainly church attendance has dropped. Why? People are afraid. They're afraid of dying. That's not wrong. Will they come back? Church attendance in the United States has always been greater than others. And in particularly Catholic churches has been greater than others. And one of the reasons why it has been greater than others is because if I go to Holy Name Cathedral in Chicago and the priest gets up and gives a sermon, he is talking about the Catholic Church, not what he believes. If I come here to Sacred Heart and the priest gets up, the same is true. I come to this church because I'm a Roman Catholic, not because of any particular priest. There's a second issue. Do we believe the grace of God comes from the Eucharist in that tabernacle, consecrated on that altar, through the 7 sacraments that you have received? Baptism, penance, Eucharist, marriage, ultimately the sacrament of the sick when we're dying. Is that grace an important factor in your life? I asked for the last 15 years I've been involved with RCIA here and in Chicago. I always ask converts, why do you want to become a Catholic? What we believe is very countercultural. And you know what they say to me? I need help to get through this life. I need someone to help me to decide what is right and wrong. And by the time they go through RCIA, which is a long 6-month process, they learn that we have an invisible means of support that most people don't, the grace of God. That grace helps us through good times and bad. So do I think that people will come back? Yes. Is there a fall off? Yes. But what is a greater issue than COVID is the lack of priests, the lack of you encouraging your grandsons, nieces, or nephews, and others to enter religious life. We have a sister sitting in the back of this church. Why don't we have more young women doing this? Oh, it's all because of all of this sexual stuff that's going on, that the church is out of control, it's destroying itself. I have news for you. There are more pedophiles in public education and more issues in our public schools than there are in the Catholic Church. Far more. And the issue of pedophilia and sexual abuse. Just because someone puts on a habit or wears a collar doesn't turn them into a saint. You tell me a profession you can speak to, whether it's a doctor, a lawyer, a judge. There are good, there's the bad, and there's the ugly. These are human beings. We hope that the grace of God helps our clergy to be better, but it doesn't always work out that way. Most clergy, There are over 400,000 priests in the world, and most of those preach and practice self-sacrifice. That is really the number one crisis now in the Catholic Church. In Chicago, we'll only have about 240 priests by 2030 for the over 400 parishes that we have right now. We're so understaffed. So think about that, pray on that. Don't let the news media intimidate you with sensationalism that distorts reality, particularly when it comes to the clergy. There are bad things that happen, and certainly this Pope and Benedict and even John Paul try to deal with it. But it will always be, it will always happen because of the fact that we're human, we're not saints. Other question? Yes?
Yes, I'm just a little confused about when President Biden met with Pope Francis, and Pope Francis said, even though President Biden is for abortion, that Pope Francis said it was okay for him to get the Eucharist. I totally
I understand that. I understand that, and I have trouble with that too. But I must tell you this. Okay, I'm the president, and I'd say, look, all you people out there in America, you can have abortions. But if you are Catholics, you can't have an abortion. Now, there are Catholics who are pro-abortion, pro-life, and there are Catholics who are pro a woman's right to choose. Will he do that? I doubt it, because he'd lose. Would any Republican do it? No, he'd lose too. What does that say? It shows that the moral basis of our society that before frowned on abortion and discouraged abortion. I mean, in Chicago, where Catholic Charities was a children's hospital, where unwed mothers would bring children and they would be adopted right in that hospital. There was a chapel, they'd baptize them, and the child would then be given to the parents. Was that a good thing? I think it was, yes. We've lost that battle. And I don't expect any president, I don't care who he is going to change that issue. But my beliefs, maybe that's why I'm not running for a political office. I'm not. Yes, another question.
I think it is wrong to say that, for example, President Biden approves or is pro-abortion. President Biden is required by the Constitution to
Okay,
follow,
look, this is not, I agree with you, but this is not going to be generated into an argument between Democrats and Republicans, all right? That is not the purpose of this program. I am neutral, and I understand what you're saying. The Constitution has to be upheld, even if the Constitution supports abortion, even if the Constitution supported eugenics, even if the Constitution said that all of you had the right to die. We could go out there and you can buy heroin down at Walgreens today and tank up on it. The Supreme Court of the United States is not the moral decision point of my life or is going to determine what the Catholic Church preaches and believes. You do not believe in abortion. She does not believe in abortion. That's important. It would be great if the majority of Americans would also not believe in abortion. That is no longer true. What can we do about it? Lead better lives ourselves? Not be hypocrites in some of the ways in which we act? He who is without sin can cast the first stone. Other question?
Thank you for your answer. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yes, over here. Remember, the purpose of this program is for you to see that the difficulty is postmodernism, and it's being used by political forces of both the far left and the far right to hurt our religion and our country right now. Yes.
Please explain it to me. Why we're not supposed to spread the evangelism? Jesus Christ stand up and said, spread the evangelism, spread the Catholicism,
Yeah.
build up we, all of us, we have to preaching.
Yes.
Not what you said, and I'm sorry if I misunderstand you, I'm Hungarian. Not what you said inside in the church. Only
Correct.
to the church.
You're right. Correct.
Not in the church, everywhere.
Everywhere.
And I'm so sorry. I understand this mask, I understand this COVID, but we brainwashed each other. And I'm sorry, I'm Hungarian, and I'm born in the Iron Curtain in Europe. And I remember when we were diminishing the school, and we're not supposed to go to church in the Sunday. That's wound in my heart. I'm sorry. It's
No,
not
don't be sorry.
It's not
This is-
political. It's a church. It's a
Right.
solid foundation. I would like to put my feet in this church and every church in the Catholicism until
Okay.
when I'm dying.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now remember, I was speaking rhetorically, that that's what the postmodernists believe. That's not what I believe. You understand that, I hope, all of you. Maybe this lady doesn't. She's right, though. I mean, in the Soviet Union, there was in the Constitution that you could practice religion, but only inside a building. And even then, they shut down most of the buildings. They put the priests in prison. I mean, Hitler would almost shut down the Vatican. I mean, Pius XII signed a letter that if they took him away, they should elect another pope, that he would no longer be pope. Those of you, how many of you have heard my program on Pius XII's papacy and how he saved 900,000 Jews? Right. I'll be repeating that again. All right? And that attack was brought about by the deputy and other books that were written, sponsored by the Soviets to try to discredit the Catholic Church. So there are many insidious ways. But she's right. We need to speak out. And don't for a moment think that just because the Supreme Court at this present moment has more people that would agree with some of what we're saying, that we're safe. It could go the other way. The issue is in the streets of America. Maybe it's 10 o'clock, and those of you that need to leave, you're not offending me if you have other obligations you need to go. Yes?
Would it be fair to say that after looking at the eras, we're in that deconstruction thing, that when you get deconstruction, usually that's like a turnaround, because when something falls apart and you realize that this, and this have not worked, you always come back. Like history shows how we come back. And I know this is a very difficult time for a lot of us. I agree with you. I think that people will come back from the church to the church.
Yes.
Because in a time when the world is under attack and we all know that it's a schmozzle, that's when God's grace is the greatest. And I think that's what we need to hold on to.
The cyclical view of history is that history occurs in cycles. That's one view. I don't necessarily completely agree with it. But I do agree that this is a time period of great upheaval and doubt. A lot of things are changing. Technology is driving a lot of it. Some of you maybe have children who lost their jobs because of technology. And they're struggling now to find new employment. And because of technology and because of the lack of communication, I really believe that there's less communication going on today and more isolation due to electronic communication. People aren't talking to each other. They're talking like this. All right? Now remember, the church is not a democratic institution. We live in a democratic institution. It's called the United States of America. It's very messy. I don't want it any other way. But the purpose of the United States of America is that there would be an educated citizenry an educated citizenry who would elect officials who would come together and help pass laws that would work. And if you study the history of the US, that has worked pretty well for most people, not for everyone. Right now, we're in a period of tremendous tension and distress. It's a great spiritual crisis we're going through. This is not an economic crisis. This is not a political crisis. This is a spiritual crisis. People have lost their way. They have given up. Whoever shouts the loudest is going to be the one that's going to be heard the most. Whoever has the best propaganda is going to be the one that's going to determine. So I today close, and I'll stay afterwards and we can talk some more, since it's now a little after 10 and I promised to be over by 10 o'clock. Guard yourself, not just in your beliefs of the Catholic Church, but also look critically at your own prejudices, how you determine what is the truth in contemporary society. If you want to learn more, come to 1 o'clock on Saturday. I'll be at the Air Museum. I've done programs there like I've done here for 20 years at the Air Museum. And they too have safeguards, so don't worry. And it's a bigger space even than this. But I thank you very much for your attention. You've been a great audience. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.